Welcome to the deep dive. This one is custom tailored just for you. We are delving into this incredibly dense but honestly fascinating stack of research that you sent us regarding the physical limits of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's a really eye-opening set of sources today.
It really is because, if you've been following the AI boom over the last few years, the prevailing narrative is almost entirely digital, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The ultimate battle is supposedly about, who has the fastest chips or the most elegant algorithms, the most massive data sets.
Right, it's all about the software and the silicon.
Exactly. But the sources you provided completely flip that script. So what if the thing that actually decides the future of AI isn't digital at all? What if the bottleneck is actually like the municipal water table in a small town you've literally never even heard of?
Which is a wild thing to think about. It forces this total inversion of how we normally conceptualize technology.
Yeah.
Because we are so conditioned to think of the internet, and by extension, AI, as existing purely in the ether,
Yeah.
the cloud.
All right, the magical cloud where everything just floats.
Exactly. But the cloud is actually a colossal, incredibly hot building on the ground. And the physical footprint of artificial intelligence is currently crashing into the hard limitations of the real world at an astonishing speed.
Okay, let's unpack this because the roadmap you gave us today is anchored by this really illuminating structural analysis article. It's called GOA-55.
Yeah, great paper.
Yeah, and it tracks the physical footprints of tech infrastructure. And we're also weaving in a couple of advanced systems theories that you shared. So there's the LMOS framework and the membrane contact phase model, or MCP.
Right.
So our mission here today is to synthesize these frameworks to understand this massive, largely invisible shift. Basically, AI companies are quietly transitioning from just being massive consumers of power to acting as de facto regional infrastructure managers.
Which is a transition that local municipalities, utility regulators, and honestly, the tech companies themselves are really struggling to navigate right now.
I bet.
Because to understand why this is happening, we have to redefine the actual constraints of modern AI development.
Yeah.
For a long time, the barrier to entry was simply acquiring enough GPUs.
Just buy the chips.
Right. If you had the vendor capital to buy the hardware, you were in the game. But the GOA-55 analysis illustrates that the competitive frontier has fundamentally shifted. We've moved past the era of usable AI.
Okay, usable AI, meaning just possessing the compute power.
Exactly. Just having it. The new era is defined by what the authors call placeable AI.
Placeable AI. I actually love that phrasing because it drags the conversation right out of Silicon Valley and drops it straight into like municipal zoning meetings.
It really does.
Because you can have infinite venture capital and a warehouse full of next generation chips, but those chips are glorified space heaters if you can't plug them in.
They are completely inert. I mean, they're useless without a highly specific physical environment.
Yeah.
A modern AI data center just cannot function in a vacuum.
Right.
It requires acres of industrial zoned land. It requires a dedicated high-voltage grid connection capable of delivering hundreds of megawatts of power.
Which is huge.
Oh, it's massive. And it demands millions of gallons of water for evaporative cooling towers because the heat generated by these GPU clusters is just immense.
Yeah, they run incredibly hot.
And then on top of that, it needs regional transmission capacity so the data can actually leave the building. And perhaps most difficult of all, it requires local community acceptance. The facility has to prove its regional burdens can be absorbed. I mean, look at the projections. The International Energy Agency, they project global data center power consumption could actually double to 945 terawatt hours by 2030.
Yay, double by 2030.
945 terawatt hours.
That is insane. So it's basically like buying a fleet of massive futuristic sports cars, but then realizing there are literally no paved roads to drive them on.
That is the perfect analogy.
So for you listening to this right now, this means that the AI in your pocket, this magical digital assistant, is entirely dependent on physical regional realities, like the local water levels and the power grid in a town you've never been to.
Right. It's deeply, deeply physical.
But let me throw a wrench in that, though, because these are some of the wealthiest corporations in human history.
True.
If they need land and water and power, can't they just buy their way through the problem? I mean, if a town needs a new power substation, a trillion-dollar tech giant can certainly afford to just write the check, right?
Well, see, writing the check isn't the problem. The problem is time.
time.
Yeah, and this brings us directly to that LMOS systems framework you included,
Yeah.
which introduces this phenomenal concept called velocity mismatch.
Velocity mismatch. Okay, what is that?
So the framework separates the world into different operational speeds. You have OS speed, which is the operating speed of capital, software development, hardware procurement.
Basically the digital world.
Right. And OS speed is blistering. A tech company can allocate $1 billion and order 50,000 GPUs in an afternoon.
But the physical world doesn't move in an afternoon.
Exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
The physical world moves at what they call R speed, or reality speed,
Ah, okay.
permitting a new high-voltage power substation, conducting environmental impact studies, laying miles of underground transmission lines, upgrading a municipal water treatment plant just to handle industrial cooling demands.
That stuff takes forever.
It takes years, sometimes over a decade.
So you have this massive collision. You have billions of dollars in AI hardware arriving at OS speed, just slamming into regional public infrastructure that moves at R speed.
Risk face.
So how are they bridging that gap? Because these companies aren't just, leaving their shiny new GPUs sitting in cardboard boxes for 10 years waiting for the local government to build a power plant.
No, of course not. They are internalizing the burden. Because the AI facilities cannot wait for R-speed public infrastructure to catch up, they are physically building the infrastructure themselves, really just to secure the permits to exist.
Wow.
We are seeing data centers implementing massive on-site power generation. They are installing industrial-scale battery storage facilities. They're essentially building their own private microgrids.
That's wild. And the sources mention some staggering examples of this, like Google struck a 1 gigawatt demand response contract with utilities in the US.
Right.
And then Microsoft established this dedicated fund specifically to finance public power grid infrastructure in Australia.
Yeah, it's happening globally.
Right. But when you see headlines like that, as a general reader, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that AI companies are suddenly stepping up to be the good guys.
Right, the saviors of the grid.
Exactly. The narrative becomes, look at big tech swooping in to modernize our aging local utility grids. Does this mean they're acting like public utilities now?
No, that is a highly prevalent simplification. And the structural analysis in GOA-55 explicitly warns against framing this through the lens of corporate virtue or benevolence.
Okay, so it's not out of the goodness of their hearts.
Not at all. They are not volunteering to become public utilities. This is purely driven by absolute constraints. Think about it. A municipality looking at a proposal for a 500 megawatt data center knows that plugging it into their existing grid would instantly cause rolling blackouts.
It would just fry the system.
Exactly. So the municipality will simply deny the zoning permit.
So becoming a pseudo-utility is literally a prerequisite for existence.
It is the only physical way their facilities can be built and operated. If they don't bring their own power generation and their own cooling infrastructure to the table, they don't get a seat.
They just get denied.
Yeah, they have to prove they won't crash the local system, which forces them to become active participants in the management of that local system.
But hold on. This raises a massive red flag. When we casually say AI companies are building this local infrastructure and signing these utility contracts, we're treating them like a monolith, like it's just one guy in a suit.
Right.
But anyone who has ever looked at a corporate org chart knows it's never that simple. If a private microgrid powering an AI facility suddenly destabilizes the municipal power supply, who exactly is in charge?
That is such a good point, and you've identified one of the most critical structural vulnerabilities that the GOA-55 paper outlines. There is no such thing as a single AI company in this context.
It's way more complicated.
It's wildly fractured. The ecosystem is completely segmented. The entity developing the actual AI model, the algorithm itself, is often completely separated from the cloud provider that hosts the model.
And let me guess, the cloud provider doesn't even own the physical building where the servers actually live?
In many cases, no. The cloud provider leases space from a dedicated data center operator, and that operator manages the cooling and the backup generators.
Okay, so that's 3 different companies already.
But wait, it goes deeper.
Oh, no.
The data center operator might simply be leasing the physical shell of the building from a real estate investment trust, an investment fund which actually owns the land.
Wow.
And none of those entities might be the specific subsidiary that signed the 20-year power purchase agreement with the local utility.
So wait, the company demanding the power might not own the building, and the company owning the building might not be the one making the operational decisions.
Exactly.
It's like a corporate Russian nesting doll. The core of the doll is a language model demanding an obscene amount of electricity, but the outer shell holding the municipal permit is some obscure real estate holding company.
Which makes responsibility incredibly hard to locate.
So if the local power grid fails, or the local river runs dry from the cooling demands, who is legally accountable?
Well, the sources referred to this terrifying ambiguity as silence detection.
Silency.
Yeah. During normal sunny day operations, the distribution of responsibility is silent. It's completely invisible.
Because everything is working fine.
Right. Nobody thinks to ask which of those five nested companies is responsible for decommissioning a massive lithium-ion battery facility 20 years from now, or which specific executive decides which computational tasks get throttled down during a regional brownout.
Because there's no reason to ask until something breaks. But the moment a crisis hits, that silence evaporates.
Exactly. The moment the system is under severe stress, say a historic drought or a localized blackout, the fractured nature of the AI stack becomes glaringly obvious.
Everyone just points fingers.
Right, when the municipal water manager calls to demand a reduction in usage, they might find themselves trapped in a labyrinth of subcontractors, with everyone pointing fingers at someone else up the chain. The responsibility was distributed so widely across the different actors that it effectively vanished.
Okay, so what happens when this highly fragmented system faces a real-world stress test? Because here's where it gets really interesting. GOA-55 doesn't just leave this in the realm of theory. They highlight a very specific, real-world example from July 2026.
Yes, the eastern U.S. heat wave. That event perfectly encapsulates the dynamic we are discussing. During that heat wave, the regional public power grid was pushed to the absolute brink of collapse by the sheer volume of residential air conditioning demand.
Everyone was just trying not to melt.
Exactly. And to prevent a catastrophic multi-state blackout, emergency demand response protocols were activated.
Now, for those unfamiliar, demand response is basically when the grid operator hits a big red button and tells massive industrial users, hey, drop off the grid right now or the whole system goes down.
That's the mechanism. And the AI data centers in the region complied. They disconnected from the public grid.
Okay.
But to keep their servers running and prevent their algorithms from crashing, they fired up their on-site emergency backup power.
Which means
Hundreds of massive industrial diesel generators.
wow. But on paper, if you're sitting in the grid operator's control room, that looks like a massive success, right? The grid didn't collapse.
At the macro level, yes, a regional blackout was avoided. The burden on the electrical grid was drastically reduced. But this is the crucial analytical takeaway from the sources. Burdens do not disappear.
Right.
They simply change coordinates.
Change coordinate.
Yes. The burden shifted from a macro electrical problem on the public grid to a localized micro-environmental problem inflicted on the immediate surrounding community.
Because suddenly, the neighborhoods adjacent to these data centers are listening to the equivalent of jet engines roaring to life in their backyards.
Noise pollution on an industrial scale, yes. But also localized diesel emissions settling over residential areas. And because those generators consume thousands of gallons of fuel an hour, you suddenly have a logistical nightmare.
Oh, the trucks.
Heavy fuel trucks rumbling down local municipal roads around the clock just to keep the data centers online.
It's the ultimate irony. You probably have tech executives sitting in sleek, carbon-neutral offices in Silicon Valley praising their AI for saving the grid, while a neighborhood in Virginia is literally choking on diesel exhaust so someone's chatbot doesn't experience latency.
And we aren't saying we should reject technological solutions, right? Avoiding a blackout is objectively good.
Right. Nobody wants the power to go out.
But we have to track where the cost is being paid. We have to observe where the burden has moved.
Which brings us to the other theoretical framework you provided, the membrane contact phase model, or MCP, because this localized shifting of burdens creates a profoundly strange new gray area between public utilities and private tech, right?
It really does. The MCP model suggests we need to stop thinking of public and private infrastructure as two separate boxes with a solid line between them.
Instead, it's a semi-public membrane.
Exactly. The boundary is blurring into a highly permeable, thick intermediate zone. Power and data are flowing in both directions. You now have privately owned, massive battery arrays sitting inside private data centers
Hmm.
that are actively being used to balance the frequency of the public power grid.
And they're selling power back, too.
Right, you have private generation facilities feeding into regional networks.
It's basically like a private citizen stepping in to direct traffic at a broken intersection. I mean, it's really helpful in the moment. It keeps cars from crashing, but they don't have any actual legal authority.
Right.
And if there's a crash, who takes the blame?
The liability is completely tangled.
Yeah.
The LNOS framework diagnoses this tension as an OS compatibility error.
OS compatibility error. I love the tech terms for physical problems.
Right, you have two entirely different operating systems trying to run the same regional hardware.
So the corporate OS versus the public OS.
Exactly. But corporate OS is fundamentally programmed to seek independence, maximize asset efficiency, and ensure uninterrupted operation for its shareholders.
All right.
While the public OS is programmed to seek stability, broad equity, and resilience for the entire region. So even though private equipment is performing a quasi-public function by stabilizing the grid, the public does not suddenly gain ownership of those assets.
The local mayor can't just walk into a hyperscale data center and declare, by the power vested in me, I am seizing control of your cooling towers for the good of the city.
They have zero shutdown authority. They have no say in the decision-making or the maintenance schedules of those batteries. And crucially, they have no exit responsibility.
Exit responsibility, meaning if they leave.
Right. If a tech giant decides 3 years from now that a particular AI facility is no longer profitable, they can just pack up and leave. They take their grid-stabilizing assets with them. The public utility might have grown entirely dependent on a function that they had absolutely no structural control over.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Especially if you're living in a town that might be targeted for one of these facilities. If this semi-public membrane is the future of human infrastructure, who actually gets to live inside the safe part of that membrane?
That is a big question.
Because building your own power plants, laying your own fiber, internalizing all these public burdens, it requires a level of capital that defies comprehension.
And that is perhaps the most sobering conclusion drawn by the GOA-55 analysts. Because the capital requirements are so astronomical, only the absolute largest megacorporations can participate.
Yeah, a nimble AI startup cannot just go build a 50-megawatt microgrid to satisfy a zoning board.
Exactly. They can't. And this radically distorts the landscape.
So we aren't creating a broad, resilient public grid. We're essentially building neo-feudal tech castles.
The MCP model calls this localized fortification. In an ideal world, integrating these advanced systems would create what the model terms phase fluidity.
Phase fluidity, which is what exactly?
It's a broad societal resilience where resources dynamically flow to wherever the public needs them most. But because this infrastructure is driven by private capital seeking to protect its own assets, it creates isolated zones of extreme fortification instead.
The sources refer to these as compensation spheres, right?
Yes, compensation spheres.
It's this dynamic of mutual compensation and mutual constraint.
Exactly. It's not just a one-way street of the tech company helping the town. The AI facility supports the grid, perhaps keeping the lights on in its immediate vicinity during a storm. But it heavily relies on that same local grid for its fundamental legitimacy, for its water rights, and for public road access.
So if you live inside one of these compensation spheres, your neighborhood's power grid might actually be heavily reinforced by the tech giant next door. You might experience way fewer blackouts because their massive battery banks are silently regulating the voltage on your street.
True, but the constraint side of that equation is severe.
Oh.
You are entirely at their mercy when regional resources experience genuine scarcity. If your state suffers a massive, multi-year drought, and there is only enough water left in the reservoir to either supply the municipal drinking system or run the data center's evaporative cooling towers, who actually wins that negotiation?
Oh, man.
Is it the municipality that holds the mandate for public health, or the corporation that functionally controls the region's power stabilization?
Wow. That is the core of the whole issue right there. I mean, we started this deep dive thinking about placing AI in the digital realm, optimizing code and training models.
Right, the usable AI.
But the reality is that we are wrestling with this massive physical footprint crashing into the earth. We are watching the real-time creation of a thick, highly complicated semi-public membrane where the ambitions of private tech and the survival needs of public infrastructure are awkwardly and honestly dangerously overlapping.
It represents a fundamental shift in how human settlements interact with technology. It is no longer just a digital service we access through a screen. It has literally become a physical neighbor.
A very loud, thirsty neighbor.
a neighbor that demands vast amounts of local resources and offers crucial infrastructure in return, but entirely on its own terms. As these systems intertwine, the ultimate question isn't whether AI can sustain its own power.
Right.
The central question the sources leave us with is this: when the functions required to sustain our regional infrastructure are distributed across a dozen invisible private actors, who reconnects responsibility when the system breaks down?
Think about that the next time you use an AI tool to summarize a meeting or draft an email for work. The infrastructure making that digital convenience possible is fundamentally altering the physical world around us. And, here's a final thought for you to mull over. If we increasingly rely on the algorithms and the risk models of private tech companies to stabilize our local power grids and manage our water during environmental crises, at what point do these private algorithms effectively become our unelected local governments? Next time your likes flicker and then study themselves, ask yourself, who exactly is keeping them on?